All right, we'll go ahead and get started. And sorry guys if I'm wincing and stuff. Like I said, I did something to my back. I think I dislocated a rib. Not a big deal, but it's a little bit painful today. So this is the second to last class. Our last class is going to be Friday. I have a alternative kind of research-oriented project that I'm going to post in a few minutes. In the event that you were unable to attend the guest speaker, it's going to be a little bit more work than if you were to just write the 5-page paper, but it's going to be less overall writing. And what that's going to be is to find a piece of legislation within the Missouri legislature and describe its progress throughout the entire legislative process. I'll have detailed requirements for you on that, but the idea is for you to see how things actually become laws by following a piece of legislation through it. All right, so last chapter was all about domestic policy, economy and social policy. Today, our policy is going to be focusing on outside the country. So domestic policy answers, what should government do at home? But foreign policy asks the question of how should the United States act in a world where other governments are doing the same thing. What is foreign policy? The simple definition is that foreign policy is action and strategies a country uses to interact with other countries and global actors. For example, we talk about alliances, military action, trade agreements, negotiations, sanctions, and humanitarian aid. The main point is that foreign policy is not one thing. It includes many different tools and choices. Foreign policy is not just war. It is everything a country does beyond its borders. Why does foreign policy make a difference? This is the most important question. The key differences from domestic policy and foreign policy are these. 1, there's no central authority. There is no world government, there's no final referee, and countries operate in an international system. Basically, this is about as close as you get to everybody trying to play fair on the playground. Here's the thing with it though. While there aren't direct authorities and stuff like that, there are different treaties that countries have entered into. For example, has anybody heard of The Hague? The Hague is an international criminal court that was established extensively to try war crimes. And the thing that's kind of bizarre about it is that normally what we would have seen is that in the event you had a world leader that was committing crimes against the world, so international sort of crimes, we would see them be indicted and then prosecuted through The Hague. The United States kind of turned that on end when we went and seized Maduro from Venezuela. That would normally be something that we don't have jurisdiction over. The United States has traditionally not been in the business of invading another country's sovereignty to extradite a criminal. Normally the way it would work is that if we want to prosecute somebody who's in Spain, for example, we'd call up Spain through our diplomatic channels and say, hey, you all have so-and-so over there, can you arrest them and give them to us? And Spain would be like, yeah, we'll do that, or no, we won't. These are through things called extradition treaties. Us going and just doing it on our own, not a common thing. The normal way this would work in the world is that The Hague would do it. 2, to my knowledge, a United States diplomat or leader has not been indicted in the international court. I think that we might see that happen at some point in the next couple of years. All right, the second major difference between domestic and foreign policy is the book says that there are higher stakes. I don't know if I agree with this, because higher stakes, according to whose calculus? I don't think that most people give a shit about what's happening with like the United States' relationship with Sudan, for example. but we certainly care about whether or not we're going to be able to afford gas to get to and from work. So is it higher stakes? Well, yeah, sort of, in that we could have international incidences and wars and things. But again, I think it's a matter of perspective. So the reason that the book says that it's higher stake is that, one, we're dealing with national security. Do we let people into our country that are good or bad for it? Two, this deals with war and peace, and certainly in some circumstances, this is a big thing that people would be concerned about. I think that a lot of Americans are concerned about what we're doing related to war and peace to a certain extent. And it certainly is something that what a lot of people want to avoid, a war like Vietnam, Korea, World War II, where we have to have a draft. But there are little military actions happening all the time that I think the general populace are ignorant to. And then third, there's economic stability. This is kind of like the economic policy we talked about, only on the big stage. Because one of the things that's interesting about it is that if the Chinese stock market, for example, collapses, a lot of Americans would think, oh, well, it doesn't affect us. It certainly does, because we have had, over the last 70 years or so, something called globalization, where all of our economies are pretty well tied together. This isn't 1930s United States where we're kind of isolated. We produce everything we need, things like that. We rely on a lot of other countries to produce things for us, but so do a lot of other countries. For example, the United States has a lot of agriculture things that we export. We import a lot of the things that are made for us. 3, there's a lot more uncertainty when we're dealing with foreign policy. There's less reliable information. You can't just go up to, I don't know, Iran and be like, hey, how far along are you in your nuclear program? Whereas this would be information that the United States government, as its sponsor, would probably know. 2, there's unpredictable actors. Who knows what people are going to do in a lot of situations. You could have world leaders that change the name of the game pretty quickly. 3, there are going to be long-term consequences. When we do something like invade Iran, this isn't just a go in, go out sort of thing. This is going to set precedent. It's going to change the politics in the region for a long time. And we're going to be dealing with the aftermath for a while. For example, the United States sponsored the Osama bin Laden regime for years. But we kind of created a problem with that when we did it, because Osama bin Laden famously went on to blow up the World Trade Center by crashing planes into it. Then we were in Iraq, having invaded for, I think, more than a decade. But this is not the sort of thing where when you deal with international politics, you can flip a switch and everything gets better. It usually takes a long, long time. 4, speed and security. Decisions often must be made quickly, and sometimes information cannot be fully public. The main point here is that foreign policy is harder because rules are weaker, risks are higher, and outcomes are less predictable. Domestic policy happens inside a system with rules. Foreign policy happens in a system where rules are weaker and power matters more. So goals of foreign policy, we'll run through these pretty quickly. First is security, to protect the country from threats. 2 is economic interests, setting up trade deals, opening up markets to us, and gaining the resources our country needs. You've heard a lot about rare earth metals in the news lately, hopefully. Rare earth metals are in a lot of different things, like pretty much all phones have some rare earth metals in them. It's needed for military applications. It's needed for artificial intelligence. The thing about it is they're not in many areas. one of the greatest concentrations of rare earth metals is, does anybody know? The United States wanted to annex them for a little bit. Greenland. And so a big reason for, hey, we need Greenland to be part of the United States is access to those resources. 3, alliances and influences. We want to maintain the relationships with other countries. For example, you may or may not have heard the King of England is here right now. There was a state dinner last night. Great Britain has historically been one of our strongest allies. You know, for the last 100 years or so after things settled down from our little rebellion. 4, values and ideas. We want to spread our concept of what values are important. Democracy, human rights, depending on the context, these are going to be things we care about. And then 5, stability. We want to prevent major conflicts or disruptions. These goals often conflict, though. So for example, promoting democracy may not maintain stability. If we want to try and overthrow a communist regime, we might inadvertently cause the region to erupt into chaos. We might want to have easier economic ties, but this comes with security risks. For example, if you're a truck driver, you can get special types of global entry so that you can basically go through a fast lane when you're going to Canada or Mexico. There's a security risk there, right? But at the end of the day, we think that having the easier transport of goods and goods across those borders is more important. And then finally, we can kind of balance alliances versus independent actions. The war on Iran, for example, we kind of acted unilaterally, but now the Trump administration wants to have those alliances work with us too. Foreign policy is often about choosing which goal matters most in a given situation. There's something I wanted to say here. Yeah, we'll save that to the end. Who makes foreign policy? Well, there's a couple of major actors in foreign policy. First is going to be the president. They lead the foreign policy mission, so to speak, as the head of state. The head of state basically is a fancy word meaning that they're the representative of the United States on the international scene. They're going to direct executive agencies, and they can act quickly and visibly. Congress, on the other hand, has the power to declare war formally. And this is an important distinction. Does anybody know, and I've said it in here before, but can anybody repeat when the last war the United States was in was? Or what its name was?
Iraqi war?
Nope. World War II, that's exactly right. Everything since World War II. We've had the Gulf War, we've had the Korean War, the Vietnam War, I think there was another Gulf action. There was the Iraq War, basically. There was invading Afghanistan, and now Iran. All of these have been special military actions or things that have directly evaded that formal declaration of war process from Congress. They now have something called the War Powers Act, and that allows the president to engage in action without getting congressional approval for up to 60 days. The Iran war is coming up on those 60 days, so we're going to see what Congress does. But while this is a war, in that it meets the dictionary definition of a war, the administrations don't classify them as wars, so they can avoid having to actually get Congress to declare war. Second, Congress controls funding. Third, they're going to approve treaties and appointments. There's two things here to break down. One, treaties, the president gets to negotiate them, but it actually has to go to the Senate for approval. Same sort of thing. The president's going to appoint ambassadors. Ambassadors are going to be the United States' formal representative to another country. And when they appoint an ambassador, that appointment gets confirmed by the Senate. And then they're going to conduct oversights. They can have hearings and things like that to be like, what did you really do here? So, third, the State Department the bureaucracy has a role. The State Department, Defense Department, and intelligence agencies all act to support our foreign policy aims. Second, they provide expertise and carry out policy. Occasionally, the courts are involved with legal review, and then finally, interest groups advocate for specific policies and influence public debate. Public opinion shapes political incentives, but it doesn't directly work on the policy, and this is especially important in long-term conflicts. Foreign policy is not made by one person, but is not overly shared either. Many actors are involved in foreign policy, but they do not all have equal power at all times. Why is the president central? The president gets to be a single actor in this a lot of times for speed and coordination. As the commander-in-chief, they get to command the military, and as we just talked about, they can have those limited warlike things, whatever they decide to call them. They have control over the executive agencies, access to all of the intelligence, and the ability to act unilaterally in some situations. There are some contrasts, though. Congress has power, but often acts more slowly, and the president often sets the agenda. Foreign policy tends to be executive-centered, especially in fast-moving situations. All right, so we're gonna skip this. I won't have time to show you a map really quick. Yeah. Let me pull up this map really fast so we can. One of the things that's absolutely fascinating about foreign policy is so much of it comes down to geography still. You would think with like all of our modern technology doesn't really matter all that much. You'd be wrong. This is basically a picture. Right now I'm showing you Africa and Europe. There are two ways to get around this giant landmass. So if we want to get goods and services from the East Coast, we can, of course, sail directly across the Atlantic Ocean and go to the Mediterranean. That's pretty easy. There's only two ways in and out of the Med. The first is down here. It's the Strait of Gibraltar, and it's extremely tight. You know, this is in relation to the size of the countries and everything, not a very big area. You can stand on one coast and see the other one. That's one way in and out of the Mediterranean. The other way is going to be, we'll talk about in a minute. The other option you have, if you're in the United States and you want to transport goods and services, or goods across the world, is to cross the Pacific Ocean. It's bigger and then puts you over here. So if you want to go to China and stuff like this, this is a much more direct route. But the other way in and out of the Med is going to be through this, which is the Red Sea. The Red Sea has the Suez Canal right here. And so if you want to go up the Red Sea, you can, and then you can take the Suez Canal all the way back into the Mediterranean. Those are the only two ways in and out of there. So you can go up here to like the Black Sea and stuff. But this area right here is what we call the Middle East. That kind of sits between Africa and India. And this is where a lot of this drama is playing out. The Red Sea, for example, has been known in the last couple of years for piracy. You had Somalia, and people in Somalia couldn't really make any money because of different regime changes and everything like that. So they were going out and capturing boats to kind of get by. The instant problem we're having right now is with this. This is the Persian Gulf. You might have heard that we had several conflicts with it before. We've got Dubai on this point, and we've got Iran to the north here. Why is this important? Well, because everybody going in and out of the Persian Gulf has to go through the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz, again, very tiny. You can stand on one landmass and see the other. But you've got all these countries up here that are chock full of oil. So we have tons of oil that's trying to move in and out of this area. But again, it comes down to the geography at play.
So can it not go through the other? Probably not.
Nope. So this is, you could in theory ship it up this river.
Yeah, man, that river looks pretty small.
Yep. And it probably is, it doesn't go very far.
Doesn't look very...
So you could try and maybe get all the way up to Nazaria. You could maybe have like some barges take it for a while, but I mean it's pretty sketch. And what we're talking about with like oil tankers is massive, absolutely colossal ships. So yeah, that's one of the fascinating things about this is when we're talking about international politics, a lot of times we're dealing with the geography of things. For example, come on, cooperate with me thing. Nope, not what I wanted. This piece of land right here is Greenland. It's not all that big. It looks a lot bigger when we're zoomed in like this because of how we project the globe so we can see it. But it's got very little here except for all this area way up here is usually thought of to have lots of natural resources. Similarly, we've heard about the Panama Canal. If you're in the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico, I still call it that because it was named that long before Trump was president, and I bet it's named that later on. There's two ways to get through to the other side, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. The first and newest way that lots of people use is this canal right here, the Panama Canal. It cuts months off your journey because the other way to get around is to sail all the way down here and go basically around Cape Horn and then go all the way back up. So if we want to ship goods from one part of the country to the other, we can go this way, which is going to take a couple months if you're in a big cargo ship, or you can go through the Panama Canal, which will take, I think it takes 3 days to transit the canal. No, it takes 2 days to transit the Panama Canal. You could also, in theory, sail up around Greenland, through the Arctic Ocean, and then down around Alaska, but that's adding just as much time as trying to sail around Cape Horn. Lastly, the United States and Russia. We bought Alaska from Russia for very little because they didn't want it at the time. Now it's very strategically important because, again, you can't probably see this distance, but it would take maybe a day or two to sail in like a sailboat from Cape Prince of Wales to Lavrantia. I don't know, I can't pronounce Alaskan things very well. So, I'm sorry, Russian names very well. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about how so much of what we think about in politics comes down to the geography of situations when we're talking about foreign policy. All right, with that, are there any questions? Sorry for the technical delays, guys. All right, with that, I'll end the recording and we will do roll.